The general theory of NoSQL is similar to traditional SQL injection in that we're interfering with the query that gets executed. However, the style of NoSQL is a little bit different, so we'll do a quick primer on NoSQL and MongoDB before taking a look at the lab. I've included this because of the increased popularity of NoSQL, and you'll find that many APIs are backed with MongoDB these days, and MongoDB is currently the most popular NoSQL database. So let's take a look. So I'm just going to drop into a Mongo shell to begin with, so Mongo sh. And here you can see we've connected, so don't worry too much about what's going on, but what we'll do first is we'll use DemoDB. So here we just type DemoDB and you can see that we've switched to DemoDB. And I suspect I'm going to be in the way, so I'll just move myself out of the way for the time being. So now we're using this database called DemoDB. We actually need to create a collection, but MongoDB, because it's quite flexible, will create a collection for us when we try to add data. Now, collections are like tables, but they're not constrained by the columns. So for example, if you add a user to a collection, you can give it a username, a password, an age, and other properties. And then if you add another user to the collection, maybe you just give it a username and password and you don't give it an age, for example. Imagine that you can basically add columns on the fly, but they're not required by default. So let me show you quickly. So DB, which is the current DB, so we're DemoDB, and I'm going to call the collection users, and I'm just going to use the insert one command like this. And I'm going to pass in a JSON object, so I'm just going to put name, and we're going to have Jeremy, and let's say Jeremy's password is cheesecake, like before, or I think before. And let's give him a country as well, so let's say that Jeremy is from Sweden. And now we get acknowledge true, and it's inserted it. And if we want to see the collection, we can do show collections, and we have our users collection. And if we want to list everything in there, we can do db.users.find, and it will list everything in there. So in this case, Jeremy has an object ID, and he has a name. This is automatically created and assigned, by the way. We didn't have to add this ourselves. So we have the name Jeremy, the password cheesecake, and the country Sweden. If we add another user, let's say that we add Jessamy, and Jessamy's password is tiramisu, and Jessamy is from Scotland, but Jessamy also has an age, and she's 35. And then now when we find, we see we have Jeremy, his password is cheesecake, his country is Sweden, but Jessamy is also in there with a name, password, country, but also the age of 35. So if we want to find just one user, we can do db.users.find, and we can pass in some parameters. So for example, we can just say, I want all users of age 35. And it just returns Jessamy, because Jessamy is the only one with the age 25. Again, you might want all users with the name Jeremy, and it will pull Jeremy. And if we have some duplicate entries, so for example, there are two Jessamys, and this one prefers lemon tart, for example, but lives in Wales and has the same age, you can see that it doesn't mind us having repeated fields because these are not necessarily unique. And when we do find, we can find all the users with the name Jessamy, and it returns both Jessamys. Now, one other thing to consider is that we also have JSON operators, and we're going to use these operators in our injection tag. So for example, a typical login query might look something like db.users.find, and it might have name, and obviously we pass in the name Jeremy, and it might have the password and we pass in Jeremy's password, which, if I recall, is cheesecake. If we don't supply the correct password, let's say we know he likes cheese but not cake, it doesn't find Jeremy. So this might be a typical login query that is part of our application. What we can do is, if we have control over this, we might want to input something like a JSON operator. So we could say something like the password is not equal to 0, for example. And this returns Jeremy. And obviously, as long as we don't put the correct password in here, so not equal to undefined or blank, we'll also pass Jeremy. So in this case, we can use JSON operators to bypass the logic of the application's NoSQL queries. So let's take what we've learned here and apply this to the lab. All right, so I'm in the labs folder, and as you can see, I have the API NoSQL injection zip. So I'm just going to unzip this. You can see there's quite a few modules in there. This is because it's using Node and Express. And we're just going to cd into this folder, clear ls sudo docker compose up. And we'll give it a minute to build the application. While it's doing that, I can load up Firefox and also Burp Suite. And it doesn't matter whether you have the professional or community edition, we're just going to use the repeater for this one. While this is loading up, actually, I should say that basically fuzzing for NoSQL vulnerabilities is exactly the same as fuzzing for SQL injection vulnerabilities, except that your word list may be a little bit different. So if you have seclists installed, if you don't have it installed, you can install it with sudo apt install seclists like this, and it's going to tell me that I've already installed it. And then if we come into seclists, so if we ls user share not word lists, seclists. And before we used the fuzzing, and I think we used the SQLi, and there are some SQL word lists in here. If we come back and we go back into fuzzing, and we come into databases, and you'll see that there is a NoSQL.txt file here. So if we just cat this, for example, you can see that this is full of NoSQL injection payloads. So if you're fuzzing for NoSQL injection, you'll want to use a list like this rather than the traditional SQL injection lists. So let's come back to here, and we got a warning. This is because I have Mongo already running, I think. So sudo systemctl stop. And let's try again. Trying to use the same ports that MongoDB was already using on my system. All right, so let's come into localhost. And we have our NoSQL injection. Now, if there are no current users, feel free to add some. So for example, we have Jessamy, we can add the username and password, Jessamy, and this will add it to the current users. But if there are already some there, then you can carry on with the exercise. And this is just to demonstrate NoSQL injection. So if I log in as Alex, you get a success, logged in as Alex. But if I log in with the wrong username or the wrong password, we get, sorry, you provided incorrect credentials. So let's switch on our proxy. And I'm just going to add in asd and hit login, and then come to Web Suite, come to proxy, HTTP history, localhost, and we can see that this is kind of a bad practice, but I think it's okay just for our demonstration labs. But obviously, when you log in, you don't want your username and password being passed via the URI. If you ever see this in a web application, you should report this as an issue or a finding. So let's just send this to repeater, and then we'll send it once so that we can see. And I think the message that comes back is sorry. So I'm just going to add sorry into the search here, and if I move myself out of the way, you can see that we have one match down here in the corner. So if I send a request and I don't see this one match, I know that my request has been successful, or what you can do is you can render the page and look at it yourself. All right, so here, what we want to do is let's try and log in as admin. So we'll send another request. It comes back as 200 OK, but we have our one match saying, sorry, you provided incorrect credentials. So what I'm going to do is, instead of doing something like or 1 equals 1 here, I'm going to say that I know this is the incorrect password because we get the sorry, your provided credentials are incorrect. And here I'm going to inject a not equals. So our query is going to say, hey, db.users.find, username equals admin, password not equals to ASD. And you'll see that when we send this query, we get 0 matches. And if we render it, we get a success, you logged in as admin. So as you can see, the theory is quite similar. We're manipulating the query to get the results that we want from the database. And if you want to know a little bit more about NoSQL payloads, you can come to something like payloads all the things on the SwissKey repo, something that you probably already have bookmarked. If you don't have it bookmarked already, then please go ahead and check this resource out. And if we just search for NoSQL injection, you'll get a page where you have a number of payloads. If you're working in JSON or PHP, for example, and also some scripts to deal with NoSQL injection as well. And as you can see, where we have a username is not equal to Toto or Tutu, and password is not equal to Toto or Tutu, and the JSON equivalent here. So the username is not equal to the null, and the password is not equal to null, and this is our JSON operator here. So depending on the underlying technology, you need to decide which payload to use and then go from there. All right, that's it for our SQL injection primer. I hope you got some insights into fuzzing, testing, and exploiting SQL injection. Of course, feel free to go over the labs we've done yourself to help you solidify the topics and test out different payloads and methodologies. I also have a small challenge for you as well to make sure that we solidify what we've learned. Let me bring you to my VM. So here we have the dashboard of the crappy API application. And I'm going to take you over to the shop, and here we have the coupons or add coupons endpoints. And this is the endpoint that I'd like you to assess and see if you can achieve SQL injection. So one thing that I do want to mention, if you're using Burp Suite, is a little quirk that might catch you out. So when using Intruder, Burp Suite usually has this payload encoding ticked automatically. So if you're fuzzing word lists and you've tried a bunch of things and you don't find anything, maybe try not using URL encoding, for example. And also with your payload, be careful with where you place your highlighting. So for example, if I have a payload that says Alex like this, I might want to test adding something inside, but this may be passed as a string, so I may want to also test something, adding my payload over the top, including those 2 quotes. So have a play around with it. I know that these things can catch you out, so they're worth bearing in mind as you're testing. Good luck with the challenge, and I'll see you in the next video.